from our heritage. Strong people, the good earth we inherit today. But we can lose today in time unless we stop to take a look at who we are, at what we are, and how we live.
Who we are? We're a river people in Minnesota. How we live on the rivers as much as we can. We always did, since way before the beginning of the 18th century, when we were the voyageurs, lone men who came in their canoes looking for the wealth of skins which they found here in such abundance. And we were gallant and courageous kind of people, fording the rapids as we did in this great canoe with a whole team. This was really what you call a wholesale production of forging the rapids. And it was violent, it was dangerous, and that's the way the early men in Minnesota liked it. But we became cityfied too, and we came here by steamer, and this wonderful picture from the Minnesota Historical Society is the Ensign Northrop in the Red River of the North way back in 1854. May not have been glamorous, but it certainly moved on the rivers. Now, we have in our state 3 commercially navigable rivers. We have the Minnesota and the St. Croix, but of course, we're where the Mississippi River begins. And so we felt in telling the story of the rivers, we just had to concentrate on the old myths. But the interesting thing to me was this, maybe you've known this all the time, wouldn't you assume that some sort of a water man would take care of the river of Minnesota and the navigable waters of our country? It isn't quite so, because many, many years ago, the job became that of all people, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. Tonight, we will meet a number of our people from the Corps, find out what they do and when they began doing it. And first of all, the commander of the St. Paul District, Colonel Deloge Brown, who's been in our area 2 years. And I would like to ask him, first of all, Colonel, how come the Army got into the act?
Well, that goes back to the time of the Revolution, when the Congress appointed a chief of engineers of the Continental Army, and he later established an engineering school at West Point to train his officers. It so happened then that in the early days of our country, the only engineers were those in the Army. Now, back at that same time, too, the rivers were the principal means of transport, the way in which we moved cargo from one place to another and moved people around the country. So it was only logical that early in the history of our country, in 1824 to be exact, the Congress decided that the improvement of our inland waterways was in the interest of the overall country. The Corps of Engineers also built many other peaceful structures beside the improvement of our waters. They built the Washington Monument, the Capitol, the Pentagon, and later the Panama Canal. We have 2 other construction responsibilities besides that of being military engineers and building these peaceful structures. We have the mission of preventing flood damages by building construction to prevent floods, such as those flood walls which we're building in Fargo, the levees on the lower Mississippi, and the flood wall system which we're planning for the St. Paul and South St. Paul area. We have military construction in peacetime for the Army and for the Air Force. We are have built here in the Twin City area the 4 Nike batteries, which are now protecting this area from aerial attack. We have built for the Air Force facilities at Wold Chamberlain Field and at the air station at Duluth. And we are now building a Bomark missile base also in the Duluth area. We have had the 6 radar stations in the state of Minnesota for the Air Force have been built and added to at one time or another by the Corps of Engineers. Now to bring navigation back into focus a little bit and come back to Minnesota, the river and the falls at St. Anthony were the reason for the establishment of the Twin Cities in this area. The river provided the highway to move the explorers and the settlers into the country, and the waterway to get the produce of the country out, and the Falls of St. Anthony provided the power to run the lumber mills and the grain mills which started industry in this area. These same Falls of St. Anthony also provided power for the streetcars in the city of Minneapolis, as long as there were streetcars in the area. The traffic on the river grew from the early days until about 1870, when the speed and flexibility and greater reliability of the railroad started an eclipse of the water transportation. So that despite by 1900 there was very little traffic on the upper river. This picture here shows one of the early very large lumber rafts that moved on the river in those days. After the river, this shows a group of boats down at Reed's Landing in the heyday of the river traffic, about 1870 or 1880.
This looks like a traffic jam on the way home from the office, doesn't it?
It certainly does. But say the railroads came in, and by 1900 there was little moving on the river. In 1907, the Congress authorized a project to try to improve the river for navigation, to establish and hold a minimum of a 6-foot channel on the river. The attempt was made to do this by constricting the flow with wing dams and by dredging. And in this era, some of the first locks were built on the river. The first lock on the upper river was that at Keokuk, which was built in 1913. The first one in this upper area was the Lock and Dam number 1, or the Ford Lock and Dam, which was built in 1917. And then the third one was number 2 at Hastings, built in 1930. With the renaissance of traffic on the lower river in the 1920s, studies were made to see what could be done to provide a reliable waterway on the upper river. And a study was made back in the middle 20s, which came up with a plan for a 9-foot channel. And this channel would be maintained by a series of locks and dams on the entire upper river, from St. Louis all the way up. In 1927, the Congress authorized the construction of this 9-foot channel on the river, and the Depression gave impetus to this great public works, which was started then and ended up in 1939 with the construction of a total of 24 locks and dams from the mouth of the Missouri River, junction of the Missouri and the Mississippi, all the way up to the Twin Cities. This reliable 9-foot depth on the upper river that resulted from these locks and dams brought the river back into its own. To give you a few statistics of how the river worked, we have the traffic in 1935 moved about 180,000 tons in the upper river. That traffic was largely coal and grain and petroleum products. In 1940, with the start of the 9-foot channel, we had our tonnage moving up to 1 million. Here's a grain barge being loaded at St. Paul. Here is coal being handled on the upper river here. In 1959, the season just closed. We handled out of the Minneapolis terminal some 900,000 tons, and out of the St. Paul area 3 million tons. And in the district as a whole, down to include the 240 miles of river in the St. Paul district, almost 6.75 million tons. But in addition to having constructed this waterway, the Corps of Engineers also maintains and operates it. And I think you would be interested in seeing something of that maintenance and operation of some of these structures that moved this 6-odd million tons of cargo in the area this last year.
Chances are, every time you cross the Ford Bridge, you might just possibly look over. For a minute or two, you might see a boat coming up into the lock. You might not. But maybe if you've grown up in this area, you've been taking it for granted a long time. It's a very exciting and glamorous story, though, really, if you take a good look at it. And this first Lock and Dam number 1, which was completed, I believe, in 1916, is being manned by a man who himself has almost half a century of service in the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. Bill Straub is lockmaster. Bill, I think for those of us who might never have visited a lock, it would be interesting to find out, first of all, what does a lockmaster do?
A lockmaster is in charge of the structure. He's responsible for the maintenance and upkeep of the structure, also to supervise the lockage of craft through the locks, and schedule the work for the men, and in general take good care of it.
You know, you make it sound very simple. And I'm sure to you it must be after all these years, because you came some 19 years ago to Lock and Dam number 1. But I'd like a little more description of why a lock is there. I know the question seems pretty naive to you, but we don't always get the message. Why did you put it there in the first place?
Well, the Corps of Engineers built Lock and Dam 1 to enable commercial barge traffic to reach Minneapolis, which was impossible before the lock was built.
I mean, it couldn't walk up the falls all by itself.
It's one of the, there are twin locks, 400 by 56, and one of the highest lifts on the river. That is 37-foot lift, and it's all hydraulically operated. It's one of the older type. The newer type are all electrically operated.
I think it would be most interesting to watch the lock in operation, Bill Straub. So will you take us back to the river and let's have a look at it. Lock and Dam number 1.
The locks are now full, and there's a boat seems to be entering from the upstream side.
You're going to operate the whole thing just from that object you're handling?
The 2 levers I'm handling there operate the lock gates. We call them miter gates.
Miter gates?
There's a shot of the water being discharged from the locks. We're lowering the boat down in the locks now. There's the boat leaving the lock. The boat's been lowered 37 feet.
How long does the operation take usually, Bill?
Complete cycle takes about a half an hour.
Now this is a boat about what tonnage?
Well, that boat's about a 40-ton boat, and the barge is a 1,500-ton capacity barge.
It's logical to assume that you'd open up a lock for a boat that size, but what about a little old rowboat? How's that going to get up?
Well, we have to leave them through. We leave a lot of them through. Canoes, rowboats, small pleasure craft.
You don't mean to tell me you fill up that whole lock. How much does it hold when it's full?
Hold about 14 million gallons.
You'll fill up 14 million gallons of river water to take up one little old canoe with one boy and his girlfriend?
Yes, we have to.
How about that? And they say the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers isn't romantic. 14 million gallons? For one boy, one girl, and one canoe. Well, we want to hear a lot more of this story. What other kind of craft come up your lot?
Oh, there's all various kinds. There's commercial tows, of course, and excursion boats, pleasure boats. People go down on rafts and then inner tubes and all sorts of contraptions.
Now, you haven't floated people on an inner tube down through the lock, have you?
What is it?
You have filled a lock for people on
Yes.
inner tubes?
Yes, we have.
How about this for service in our country? Have you any figures on how many times you open and close those miter gates, as you call them, a season, Mr. Straub?
We have for lockages. We haven't got the latest figure, but we average about 256 lockages a month.
That's a lot of activity. Oh, one thing before you get back to Lock and Dam number 1. One place you forgot to take us that you promised you were going to, and that's through the only hollow dam in the whole Mississippi River system. Let's go down into that, into your dam and see what happens. Will you explain it to us?
All right, we'll go down in the, we'll open the tunnel doors and go down the stairs into the tunnel under the dam. This is the only dam on the river that has a hollow type dam. This is what's called an Amberson type dam.
Did you ever know that you could walk from Minneapolis to St. Paul under the river? I don't know whether you can make an appointment. Is this open to the public at all, Mr. Straub?
No, not open to the public.
Well, you've had an exclusive trip tonight. Thank you very much, Bill Straub, Lockmaster of Lock and Dam number 1, U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. Now, what kind of... No, I mustn't use the word boats. Let me see, this is a problem. I can't use boats. I'm going to have to ask Captain Fiddler in a minute what you use. But, after all, Colonel Brown told us that the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers maintains the river for navigation, maintains our 9-foot channel. Well, it's very important to find out how one of the dredges involved in this job operates. And we'd like you to meet Captain Alan Fiddler, who has been with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers for 34 years. Well, Captain Fiddler didn't look like this the day I met him aboard the William A. Thompson, but rather like this. Ah, this looks more like you, Captain. Tell us about your, well, I won't use the word handsome, that would make you unhappy, but magnificent dredge, the Thompson.
Well, the dredge, Thompson itself, is one of the biggest self-propelled dredges on the river. And you notice there, that's the operating house of the dredge where the leverman controls the operations when the dredge is dredging. And this dredge is 270 feet long and 50 feet wide, and it's got a depth of the hull of 10 feet.
Now, there's a good shot of her, isn't it?
There's a picture of the dredge operating in the upper Mississippi. And this dredge has got two 650 horsepower diesel engines for auxiliary, and it has 1,000 horsepower diesel for the main pumping engine. And it has a 20-inch pump, which is one of the biggest dredges that is now operating from
now, here you really see it at work.
There's the sand that's deposited along the bank out of the channel. That's discharging out of our pontoon line, which we call a floating pipeline. There's another good picture of it.
When you say discharging, what we were seeing was not water coming out, that was sand, wasn't it?
That's right. That's probably about 25% solid.
Hmm. What's your season like in the William A. Thompson? Where do you begin?
What's that?
I say, at what time of the year do you begin, Captain Fiddler?
Well, we leave in the spring of the year, around the beginning of May. Just determines the condition of the channel. Now, in the spring of the year, we send survey parties out, sounding the different areas in the river. And whenever the area gets below 9 feet, which is maintained, it has to be cross-sectioned and the sounding sent to the St. Paul office. And they are plotted up on maps, and then they are cuts are laid out, and they are sent to the dredge and then we go out and start our operations.
How large a crew do you carry aboard the William A. Thompson?
We have a crew of 55 men and 24-hour day operation, and we have sleeping quarters and for 70 people, and we eat and sleep right on the dredge.
I think it's a good minute now to tell us a few of the things that make you so proud about your dredge, other than the fact that it's the largest hydraulic pipeline dredge in the upper Mississippi area. That's right, isn't it? Tell us about your crew. You have trouble getting the same men back again?
No, very fortunate with our crew. We generally get the same crew back every year. The deckhands, they range from 2 years to 15 years service. And my key men, they range from about 6 years up to 34 years service. So I've got a pretty experienced crew.
What would you say is one of the main reasons they come back with you every year, Captain Fiddler?
Well, I think one of the main reasons they come back every year because we feed them right on there and they sleep on it just like at home, and it seems to be just like one big family. And in fact, they're fed so good that they want to come back every year.
Will you describe some of the jobs that your men do aboard the Thompson? Give us some of the categories.
Well, I have the engineer, which takes care of the diesel engines and operates the engines. And the leverman is the man in the lever room, which you just seen in the picture there, that handles the controls as far as the dredging part. And we have a tender operator, which is operates the motorboats in doing the work around the dredge. We have a mate, which is the supervisor of each shift, and under his supervision he has 6 deckhands. And then we have carry one cook steward and 2 cooks and 5 mess attendants in the galley.
It's a large-sized family that Captain Fiddler operates, and chances are next summer or any summer when the river's open, you'll probably see the proud William A. Thompson, captained by Captain Allen Fiddler, now 34 years in the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. Well, we've taken you up a lock and put you aboard a hydraulic pipeline dredge. There's one thing we forgot to ask. With all these services, we forgot to ask the commander of the St. Paul District, Colonel Deloge Brown, whether we have to pay any toll for using these facilities. What about it, Colonel?
No, there's no toll on any of our purely domestic inland waterways, those maintained and operated by the Corps. For instance, the Lawrence Seaway, which is a joint enterprise but self-amortizing through those on our domestic inland waterways, goes back about to that same Congress in 1824, which said we would improve our waterways. The savings as a result of low-cost water transportation do not accrue to any particular barge line operator or any particular industry, but they go back through the overall economy to the citizen of the United States as a whole. Industry will go where conditions are favorable for it, and there are certain bulk commodities such as cement, sand and gravel, grain, coal, petroleum products, which are particularly adaptable to the water handling. So we see the industries which handle these going up along the waterways, the petroleum refineries, the grain elevators, the steam power plants generating our electricity, such as those northern states has in this particular area. All those are there because of the availability of this water transportation, and a few cent saving in the cost of transporting their materials in or their product out might mean the difference between a going business or one that fails. And we all know that any going business not only means jobs for the people that are working in that factory, but it means jobs back in the services which support the factory and the people that work in the factory. So, for that reason, the federal government has always seen fit to maintain and operate these navigation structures for the country.
As we tell our story of Minnesota and its various facets, Colonel Brown, we like to look at yesterday in order to be able to define today a little better and see it more clearly. But very important to us is looking into the future. What is ahead for us and the Mississippi River? What about your newest and most exciting project?
Well, the biggest job we have going in this particular area is the St. Anthony Falls, or the Minneapolis Upper Harbor Project, which we're showing you a picture here of the falls. That is a project to get water transportation over these falls, where the river drops 75 feet. These same falls which provided the power to start Minneapolis Industries also provided a bar to its development as a river port. Now, we are going to build 2 locks to take traffic up over these falls, the first of which is shown in this picture, was finished here about 2 years back. That lock has a lift of 25 feet, and along with it is a dam which replaces an old Northern States power dam. The upper lock, which will be above this one, and for which construction just started here a month or so ago, will take the barges another 49 feet from the intermediate pool just below the Great Northern Stone Arch Bridge there and lift them into the area above and northern Minneapolis. The upper lock will be completed, we hope, about 1963, and it will open up an area of some 5 miles of river bank on north of the falls, where industry can develop and have access to the river, because the banks are some only 15 or 20 feet above the river, whereas below the falls of St. Anthony, the river is in a gorge all the way down to where it joins the Minnesota. And this gorge prevents any development of terminal facilities except for a very small area adjacent in the Minneapolis terminal, adjacent to the foot of Washington Street. These pictures here show the start of the upper lock, and the outlined area in the picture there shows an artist's conception of how the upper lock will look. You see in the lower corner the lower lock, which is finished, and the upper lock going up past the Cedar Avenue Bridge. In addition to the Minneapolis Upper Harbor project, we have a project to improve navigation on the Minnesota River. Now, there is a privately developed 9-foot channel on the lower 15 miles of the Minnesota River. There is a federal project now to improve this channel and develop it further for navigation. There are 3 terminals in this area and a 4th in building, and there will undoubtedly be more as time goes on. We attempt to cast the economics of our projects over a 50-year period and determine what traffic will move in that time. To show you how this seems to work out, the first lock on the upper river, Keokuk, was built some 40 years ago and now has already been replaced with a larger one. The locks on the upper Mississippi are some only 20 years old now, so it will be quite some time perhaps before they have been outgrown. The federal government provides only the channels. The private interest must develop the harbors and the terminals, and the city of Minneapolis and St. Paul are doing just that.
Thank you very much, gentlemen of the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. And if you'd like to know more about your river and the 9-foot channel, the U.S. Army Corps will make available to you this very interesting pamphlet on the Upper Mississippi River, the 9-foot channel. Write for your free copy to U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, the St. Paul Post Office, St. Paul, U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, and ask for your booklet. Yes, lots of people use our river, commercial traffic, and people who are using the river for fun. People who are boating, families who enjoy it, all the long season, families who go in small boats and big boats, and kids who go wading too. It's a wonderful story of the river. We're glad we're a part of it. Next week, we explore the world's largest cash grain exchange. And we've many plans for many things to do still. But what is most important always?
Most important does our future lie as did our past, in keeping strong the questing mind, in our refusal to stand pat, in our desire to see, to ask, to learn what's round the bend. And to this end, we dedicate our series.